010 video, The Protist Dilemma, C and T diagrams for triad whole in parts. This is the book. I actually treated this theme or topic a long time ago at the very end of the book, as we can see here. And by the way, this is wrong, it's backwards. But in any case, I addressed it a long time ago. Okay, so let's get started. I've taught science for the last 12 years at the ALC, Alternative Learning Center, followed by Detention and Residential at Gardner-Betts, Travis County Juvenile Justice Facility, and soon at Phoenix House, a substance abuse disorder treatment center, all on behalf of Austin ISD. While it's true that there's still a lot to learn from established educational theory and practice out there, the truth of the matter is that I haven't found anything that makes a difference to teaching science to at-risk students. It was at some point that I said to myself, if you want something done right, you pretty much have to do it yourself. A few years in the making, I then proposed ReEnlightenment, a proposal that goes back beyond Athens and PreSocratic Greece of Antiquity and on to Israel of the Archaic period. Yes, at t equal to 0, to the tradition going back to the Mosaic story of creation, but an updated version as postmodern Kabbalah, one that builds on the 4 tiers of Pardes of the Tree of Life, but now expressed as the 3-in-1 of the triads of the Seed of Life. These I now present in user-friendly modality as the C and T diagrams for the teaching of science to all students at risk and at promise. That said, let's begin. Though physicist by training, I get to teach all science subjects, biology, chemistry, physics, as well as amalgamations of these, such as environmental science, health, computer credit recovery courses all across the board, and the like. Science classes are usually stacked up due to administrative considerations, meaning that, as a rule, in each class I get students from each of the science courses above mentioned. This unique setup poses both a challenge and an opportunity for teaching science to at-risk students. If there's an opposite to specialization in education, this would be it, without a doubt. However, I will not delve into the individual's merits for landing with me, rather will instead address the accountability on the side of teaching by addressing the underlying understanding of what science is to begin with. On this occasion, I will not do a large stroke approach as in my book, Pardesism, Human Science 101. Rather, I'll choose instead to showcase the malady in question by way of an illustrative example that vividly demonstrates the underlying issue. Though there are a few strong candidates for the role, herein I'll narrow my selection to the protist in biology, or protista, leaving the theme of physics and perhaps chemistry for another opportunity later on, or social studies as well. As a cultural note in passing, it happens to be the case that physics is more basic than biology, this last one being more advanced. In practice, in most countries, this transfers to teaching physics at the freshman level while teaching biology first in others, like in the United States, whose students still don't have the math skills for the charge. Since it is the case that all incoming freshmen students take biology here, and not so many get to take physics, I will start my observations on teaching with the opening science course of biology. And in this, I am not even taking into consideration the vital role that chemistry plays as well in biological processes. I mentioned the above in the context that while math is necessary to do physics, philosophy is likewise necessary to adequately address biology, as we'll soon have occasion to witness. Of course, philosophy isn't part of the curriculum, not even as a college requirement. So we'll have to do as best we can in what follows. The problem is that without the necessary prerequisites, learning and teaching biology gets reduced to the lower register of memorization, far from the higher one of understanding what is going on. Without this higher register understanding of things, no wonder we live in a badly broken world in dire need of immediate fixing. Well, that out of the way, but on the other hand, this matter of the ordering of the subjects is but a minor concern, comparatively speaking. The main concern is what we take science to be, after all. In biology, taxonomy is a big thing. The classification of organisms due to its relatively early stage of understanding. Note that it is taxonomy, the method of arrangement, and not taxology, the science of arrangement. This goes back to bypassing what is science and instead focusing on what science does, flowcharting the scientific method and forgetting science as such. That is, we don't address what science is, rather we conform ourselves with what science does. This matter is taken up in previous video essays, so on this occasion, we'll instead provide an illustrative example that highlights what the case is that we're trying to say. Science as scientific method goes back to the Greeks of enlightenment, okay? All the while, if what we want to know is what science is, we would have to go further back still to absolute time equal to zero, to the Mosaic creation story of Kabbalah, classical and postmodern, from Israel, and do ReEnlightenment. This human science of the future is precisely what we pretend to do here. All the background scaffolding schematics have already been provided in previous showings, video essays, leaving solely exhibiting the core case study that proves the point beyond reasonable doubt. In other words, you cannot teach biology, the study of life, unless we get right what science as study is to begin with. Please know that it is biology what I get paid to teach, the study of life, and not bionomy, the method of life. So I don't think it's unreasonable to inquire into my pay grade. That said, let's move on. Let's say a few general things about biology before embarking on the subject matter of the classification of the protist in question. A few words in passing. Science is the question. The question next is, what is science? Science is about inquiring. The core of science is why. If the established reply is that science is as science does, science is the scientific method. How can I instill critical thinking in my students if inquiry learning is off limits from the beginning? That's how bad it is, guys. Science as scientific method is short-circuiting education. Now, the first thing that strikes anyone studying living organisms is finding unity in diversity. This concern of ordering diversity is Linnaean taxonomy, the static classification of all organisms on the basis of shared characteristics. The core of taxonomy is the conception, naming, and classification of groups of organisms. Organisms are grouped together into taxa, singular taxon, and these groups are given a hierarchy. The principal ranks in modern use are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. This is just a review. The standard for naming organisms is binomial nomenclatures, like in Homo sapiens, genus, species, italicized, uppercase followed by lowercase. With the advent of time in the theory of evolution, the static Linnaean taxonomic system has had to adapt. The newcomers are phylogenics, the origin of time in time of organisms as embodiments of life, phylogenics, cladistics, the grouping of organisms by categories based on common ancestor, cladistics, and systematics, the relationships among living organisms with the passage of time. While the theory of evolution was a great advance compared to the Linnaean taxonomic system, static by its very nature, due to the state of the art in pre-DNA biology, still, evolution theory is laden with misconceptions proper to the cultural background of which it is an integral part. The theory of evolution, as far as our topic of the protist is concerned, starts off with the notion of phylogenetics, which, as above mentioned, refers to the origin and time of embodiments of life as living organisms or living things. On second thought, let's work backwards from practice to theory. That is, let's upfront lay out the protist classification to showcase what the inherent contradictions are and only then address the theoretical solution thereof out of the conundrum. Let's take it from the top. Biology is a science that studies life and living organisms, including their physical structure, chemical composition, function, development, and evolution, and so on. Advances in microscopy has had a profound impact on biological thinking. Cell theory states that the cell is the fundamental unit of life. Living organisms started as prokaryotes and then evolved into eukaryotes. Of the eukaryotes, there are 4 kingdoms: Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, and Protista. Let's start here with a living organisms classification in the T diagram. All these things you get them from the internet. And what I do is I am not a research biologist by a long shot. What I do is research from the internet and try to put things together. I research from the internet and try to put it together using this C and T diagram. Let's start with the T diagram, the one that I used in my book. So we have here the classification of living things. This is the tree of life. Most people still are stuck with the tree of life. They haven't gone to the seed of life. So we'll start with the tree of life because that's the only thing you can get on the internet. So the classification pretty much is the prokaryotes come up with archaea, bacteria, and then the protists, and then from here the plantae, animalia, fungi, and so on and so forth. And this one gives us a classification of living things starting with a domain, kingdoms, and so on and so forth. Now, all these things, how can you make sense of them, okay? Well, that's where the T diagram comes in. So the way to make sense is by putting bacteria, archaea, eukarya, which is here, bacteria, archaea, eukarya, and then moving on to doing first the domain, and now it's going to do the kingdoms, okay? So in the kingdoms, we're going to be doing eubacteria, archaebacteria, protista, and the protista is just, we'll look at it a bit more. The protista is just like anything else, like fungi, plantae. So then you have plantae, fungi, and animalia. I will explain on the fly as best as I can the following classification, C and T diagrams of living things. Okay, so this is the T diagram, as I said, but we are trying to introduce a C diagram. So the C diagram is the same thing on top, but just that the format is different. Here we have like the college notes or the closet space arrangement, or the Cornell notes, whatever you want to call it. So we have here, okay, so we have here the bacteria, we have here, okay, I'm sorry, okay, right, yeah. So we have here the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya, and then the animalia, and so on and so forth. We'll focus more on the protists. This is just kind of a background introduction, okay? We'll leave it here for a second. In cladistics, a clade, this is the problem when we address the dilemma of the protists, because this is just a background. In cladistics, a clade or monophyletic group is a group of organisms that consist of all the descendants of a common ancestor. Under this terminology, the protist is not a clade, not a monophyletic group, rather it's a paraphyletic group, one that spans the entire eukaryotic tree of life. Protist is like a catch-all term to signify what it is not animalia, not plant, not fungi. It is defined negatively by what it is not. Now, key to visualizing this concept of the tree of life image is the tree of life image. This intuitively means that the leaves bloom out of the branches as the branches come out from the trunk, and the trunk from the root of the trees, and so on. The leaves would correspond to the species present in the field. The rest would correspond to hierarchical classifications, all the way to a common ancestor at the very root of the tree of life. Okay, so the eukaryote domain follows sequentially the prokaryote domain. Okay, so now let's move on, properly speaking, to the Protist Dilemma, ones that we've seen the background at the domain and the kingdoms level. So we have here the Protist classification. So here again we have something similar to what we had before, And the Protist Dilemma is that the Protist Dilemma, biologists have discovered that the protists display a far greater degree of diversity than any other eukaryotic kingdom. Biologists also found that many protists are far more closely related to members of other eukaryotic kingdoms than they are to other protists. So all these guys are protists here, 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 and here. But even though they are protists, they are so different among themselves, three of them, that they have more in common with what we call animals, plants, and fungi. So the dilemma is, well, how do you make sense of all this? How do you make sense of and then some ancestors of the protists give rise to plants, animals, and fungi. Imagine, forget about this. How do you make sense of this? Like if you stay with the tree of life, you cannot make sense of it. That's the bottom line. Okay, that's where the seed of life comes in both modalities. The T modality that we have here. So what we do here, we map all these tree of life things into the seed of life T diagram. Okay, as we have here. Now allow me to explain the Protist classification dilemma. Biologists have discovered, I'm going to repeat this. Biologists have discovered that protists display a far greater degree of diversity than any other eukaryotic kingdom. Euglena, brown algae, diatoms, and slime molds are examples of protists. Biologists also found that many protists are far more closely related to members of other eukaryotic kingdoms, like plantae, animalia, and fungi, than they are to other protists, which is really strange, because that's the whole point of that the system doesn't work, with a tree diagram and the monophyletic and paraphyletic. It doesn't make any sense. Recent studies divide protists into 6 major clades, wherein each one could be considered a kingdom. The 6 major ones are Excavata, Chromalviolata, Cercozoa for Foraminifera and Radiolaria, and then Rhodophyta or red algae, and then Ammobizoa, and then Choanozoa. Okay, some ancestors of the date protists gave rise to plants, animals, and fungi. Okay, while the tree of life image adequately maps out the protists, it falls short of providing the backstory drive of the evolutionary tree. It doesn't tell you the tree is already out there. It's tree. Yeah, but you cannot understand that tree unless you follow the seed, okay, how it evolves. And that's the whole point of our presentation. This is only provided by way of the seed of life T diagram, or else it's user-friendly version of the seed diagram, college notes, or else closet space presentation. This we now proceed to exhibit first as T diagram and now as C diagram. As we said, we're going to be mapping the C diagram, the T diagram onto the C, okay? But it's the same basic idea. So then we jump straight into it. While the tree of life imagery, okay, but due to its complexity, aside that we're going to do it in 3 steps. So now we're going to do it separately. So now we have here, now we'll proceed to, as customary, to display the mapping of the Protist classification in triad C diagram from the T diagram. So now we're going to be doing it in C diagram. This we immediately follow with the Protist classification in C diagram. Okay, so we have the same thing that doesn't make any sense because the tree is already out there, The best you can do with a tree is kind of imagine, that there are roots, and from the roots, from the ground, comes out this trunk, and then you keep imagining that out of the trunk come out these branches, and out of the branches come these leaves, and out of the leaves come flowers, and so on and so forth. But you pretty much have to imagine it because all you see in front of you is a tree, okay? The advantage of the seed of life as a complement to the tree of life, I'm not saying do one or the other, you have to do both. But with the tree of life, you are missing the seed of life. And that's the whole point of the seed of life because it provides you with a dynamicity, if that's a word. Okay, so then we have here the excavata. We have the 3 protists, the excavata, and then all these guys here, and then the chromalviolata. All right, and then we jump to the ones that are more like animals, plants, and fungi, and less like the other protists, which are all these ones at the bottom. the rhodophyta, which is plant-like, and then the animal-like, and then the animal life, I'm sorry, and the fungus-like, okay, or the fungi-like. And then we move on, properly speaking, to the three plants, plants, fungi, and animal, which would be plant, fungi, and animal, okay? So by this, you're stuck. You don't really know what the hell's going on, but this makes quite a bit more sense. Okay, so now we finally have a lot of material on the table. What comes next is to make sense of it all. The C diagram solves the Protist Dilemma. Okay, as we saw, it solves it. Okay, but this isn't the take-home message, guys. Don't go away. There's more to come. The tree of life image is nothing more than the timeline flowchart, or rather, the flowchart is nothing but the tree of life image as it unfolds. The shortcomings of the tree of life in biology is essentially no different from the tree of life of classical Kabbalah as compared to the seed of life of postmodern Kabbalah, the version that I developed in my book, so to speak. Now, the T diagram, or else its postmodern version, the C diagram, says a lot more than the timeline flowchart. It says as much as the tree of life of classical Kabbalah, but without its closeness. The problem with the 4 tiers of Pardes and the 10 Sefirot is that its meaning is not immediately obvious. This is corrected by way of the 3-in-1 of the triad, be it in T diagram or else in C diagram. The next question is, what does it all mean at the end of the day? That is, what does the very fact, this is the thing, what does the very fact that we can do housekeep our thoughts in such a neat, orderly manner? How come it works? How come we can map this so neatly to here? It's not just, oh, it just happens to be by chance. No, chances can happen once. What does it even mean? What does it even work? And all of the time, I might add. This is not a one-time deal, guys. It happens every time, That's the whole point of the book. Surely, anything might happen once by accident, but always, it's more like a law underlying it all. One thing is an accident, and if that accident repeats, innumerable times, guys, it's no more an accident. It's more like a law, okay? And that's the whole point that we have here. So then we need to address evolution theory. That's the whole point I'm getting at, okay? So evolution theory as reconstitution imperative of wholeness principle. That's what we're trying to say. That the takeaway from the Protist classification, the so-called Protist Dilemma, is that it makes a statement above and beyond the mere tidy arrangement of source of our thoughts on the matter of the origin of life organisms in passing from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, from primitive to more advanced life forms, including ourselves, be said in passing. The statement it makes goes as far and touches the very theory of evolution underlying the tree of life display. There's more to the theory of evolution than the timeline display. So then we make this claim, okay? The wholeness principle. Nothing changes unless everything changes by applying the reconstitution imperative of the wholeness principle. The wholeness principle is that all comes in 4 tiers of Pardes as 3-in-1 of the triad, as in the C diagram and the T diagram. Okay, it seems to be the case that all and everything tends toward fulfilling this C or T diagram. That is, that what is driving evolution theory is the reconstitution imperative of the wholeness principle of all comes in 4 tiers Pardes as 3-in-1 of the triad. Okay, so I gave it a Kantian, Aristotelian overtone, all these imperatives and principles, okay? Or given that the triad of whole and parts, okay, it's just, that all of nature and all of culture seems to be aiming at a reenactment of the Mosaic creation story as found in Bereshit Genesis verses 1:1 to 2:3. So somehow everything seems to be like a reenactment of the creation story all over again. That's the whole point that the seed of life seems to be conveying. The consequences to teaching of biology in school are enormous. No more teaching blind evolution theory. Instead, teach reconstitution imperative of the whole principle of 4 tiers of Pardes as 3-in-1 of the triads as depicted in the C and T diagrams. In other words, teach with triads, the whole is made up of triad parts. Well, that pretty much does it, guys. Okay, yours truly, Ricardo Turullols-Bonilla, and God bless. On second thought, let me throw in an epilogue in plain English so no one can miss it. The T-diagram finds people apprehensive, perhaps due to their childhood experience learning the Pythagorean theorem back in elementary school, or maybe because they find the angles too sharp and pointed. On the other hand, who's afraid of the shoebox of a C-diagram? For nothing makes us happier than those square parcels that meet us at our doorsteps as if coming out of the blue. But this is not what I'm trying to say. Rather, that evolution theory seems to give the impression that things evolve as if by chance, without a master plan imprinted beforehand. By reconstitution theory, to give it a name, what we're saying is that you cannot know how things evolve in time if you don't know from the outset what happens at time equal to 0. Time itself is born at creation, all else follows suit. We need to know the seed of life at t equal to 0 in order to figure out later in time greater than 0 the tree of life. The T and C diagram at t equal to 0 is precisely the seed of time out of which things evolve in the tree of life. Evolution theory is just reason as rational thought, relational thought, which, like quotients, are valid for all denominators except equal to 0. And this is where revelational thought comes into the fray, the given at t equal to 0. But this theme of postmodern Kabbalah we already covered in previous video essays, so we'll drop it here. In a nutshell, the takeaway is that evolution theory can explain all evolution, but not the origin of things, hence the Protist Dilemma. That without the origin of things of an initial reconstitution theory of our friendly C and T diagrams, we are left perplexed, as if hanging by a branch of our own mischief. Thanks again, yours truly, Ricardo, and God bless.